Welcome to the Stream of Art podcast. Join me, Robyn.
And me, Michelle, as we chat openly about personal growth, creativity, and building a career in the arts. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 19th episode of the Stream of Art podcast. This week, we are going to be talking about courage. But first, as always, we are going to do our little check-in. So, Robyn, how did things go with you this week?
They were okay. I haven't been sleeping well, so that's been affecting things. And I don't know. I've kind of lost momentum a bit.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I'm keeping enough momentum that things are still kind of moving forward, but I've definitely lost that kind of like zest that I was feeling previously. So. Yeah, but I think I'm just going to kind of blame lack of sleep and just kind of start, I don't know, give myself some time to just kind of, as I get older, it's like harder and harder to recover from missing sleep. Like I've always been someone who needs like a full 8 hours, but now it's just like, if I don't get it, it takes me like a long time to recover. And that and drinking alcohol, like all of a sudden I can't tolerate any amount of alcohol and it just completely demolishes my mood the next day. So I don't know, but this whole getting older thing is
do not recommend.
Yeah.
Don't do it if you can avoid it.
The alternative is not good though, so I'll stop complaining, but just little fun changes I've been noticing.
Yeah, I think there is something kind of nice about not being able to take your body for granted the way you can when you're younger. You're forced basically to take good care of yourself so you can just function. Like you're saying, like something critical like sleep, you know, you absolutely can, for a lot of people, get away with not getting enough sleep when you're younger and you're, you know, still operate. But yeah, you get to a point now, and I'm the same way. If I have a hard time sleeping, you know, even for a day, but, you know, over the course of a few days or a week, it's just completely disabling. Like I just cannot function the way I need to. And yeah, alcohol I know is a big one. I stopped drinking years ago, so I'm not sure. I'm sure if I tried now, it would destroy me. But yeah, eating food, I'm really sensitive to a lot of different kinds of foods. So it really forces you to be thoughtful about what you do to take care of your body.
Yeah, and the thing with me is I haven't done a very good job of taking care of myself physically, so like I'm out of shape, right? And the problem that I've been having now is like I'll try to kind of add exercise back in, and then I end up like something goes wrong with my body. Like my body's just slowly falling apart. So like right now I have this weird thing behind my knee because of the way my knee is, and so I'm like, I was doing some other exercise, but then now I've just had to shift to walking because it's like otherwise creates more issues. And I've always had issues with my feet and my ankles as well, and that sort of flares up. So it's kind of like I have some regrets.
Yeah.
Like I wish I'd done different things when I was, and I'm still young, but it's like it's kind of scary because it's a slippery slope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because if you think, you know, theoretically how much time you have left if you make it into like your 80s, if you're starting to decline now,
I know exactly
how bad is it going to be?
Yeah,
50 years down the line.
Every time it's like, okay, I got to get my body healthy and in shape, you know, like I need to get it strong. And every time I start to try to do that, something goes wrong and then I end up injuring myself in some way, and then I have to like ease off. And so it's like I steps forward and then I'm having to stop and then restart. And it's like, and it's not like I'm pushing myself to excess and injuring myself. It's just that like I do very like mild exercise and then something messes up with my body. I'm like, okay, great. I'm not quite sure what to do, but okay.
Is it kind of like when somebody has like an organ transplant and you have to take medicine to keep your body from rejecting it. Your body is like
Right.
rejecting the exercise.
Yeah.
You're trying to do something good for it that'll help it perform better, and it's just like, nope, not today.
Yeah, that is legit what it feels like. Anyways, how was your week?
Oh, I was pretty sick.
Yeah.
So yeah, when we talked last week, I talked about getting a cold, and I did feel better because we recorded last Sunday morning, and I felt a lot better because at that point I really just had a sore throat, and I had a little bit of like the headache you get when you have a cold, but I felt all right, and I felt tired, but by Sunday evening I was starting to feel like my nose get stuffed up. The headache got worse. I got more fatigued. But I thought, "No, I'm sure it's just, the typical where the cold gets worse in the evening, but I still feel like I'm on the mend." And so Monday I got up and, I sort of, I took it a little bit easier, but I still did some stuff. I did my workout. I did all of that. And, but Monday evening, it hit me like a train. And from Monday through all the way through Tuesday into Wednesday, really, it wasn't until Friday evening that I started feeling like, okay, now I'm like out of the worst of it.
Right.
So I'm actually really glad I went into this week not having particularly high expectations about what I was going to be able to do, because I really didn't do anything. I probably could have done more than I did in hindsight, but because I do have a very all or nothing personality, it kind of has to be all or nothing. So I decided to opt to just do nothing because I figured that's what I probably needed so that I could get through it, because the alternative is what I've done in the past where I try to just keep working through it and then it takes forever to go away. And I just wanted to be able to heal all the way. So I think it was effective. I am now coming out of it feeling the frustration of having lost a whole week, and being extra behind. I was already feeling so overwhelmed that to have so much more work piled up on top of me is not great. But at least I feel physically well enough to start ticking stuff off my list again.
So you were sick. I wasn't sleeping well. Let's talk about courage. This is gonna be like a great. I think we're in a good headspace.
I mean, yeah. I don't know. I don't know how much easier it would be to talk about courage if we were both in super high spirits. Maybe it's at this time when we're both not feeling our best that we needed to talk about it the most.
Yeah, okay, let's go with that.
I don't know. That probably I'm going to listen back when I'm editing and be like, that doesn't make any sense. I'm just trying to look on the bright side.
Yeah, you're going to realize, like, man, was I having a fever dream? What's going on?
I don't think I got a fever, so I should not be having a fever dream. Otherwise, unless it's roller coastering again and I'm having another pass through the cold. I hope not. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on courage and specifically when applied to the kind of things we talk about. So creating, sharing art, trying to, develop as people and grow and all of that sort of thing.
Yeah. So I was just making notes on this morning, full disclosure, because yesterday I usually I'll kind of think through the topic on Saturday, think through my thoughts. But I had 4 hours of sleep on Friday night, so that nothing happened yesterday. So my mind is still kind of all muddled on, because I haven't actually had a chance to process my thoughts really. So it's going to be a fun little adventure as I talk through everything. I don't really know what to say about this in terms of how courage applies to creativity. I mean, other than it can be scary to put your stuff out there, particularly if the stuff you're creating isn't mainstream. If if it's a little bit more niche, because putting things out there that like you understand and you get, but you realize no one else is really going to understand, or a large majority of people won't get it. That, I mean, it takes a lot of courage, I think, to go against the grain, essentially, right? Like,
Yeah.
but when I was thinking about it, my mind kind of went more to the way we kind of define courage as a society. Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting because what I was sort of thinking was what constitutes a courageous act is very different for everyone. But on a societal level, we kind of celebrate the same sorts of things as being courageous,
Okay.
which is interesting to me. It's like we have this fixed definition of what constitutes being courageous, what constitutes a courageous act, and the people doing those things are brave.
Mm-hmm.
But it kind of cuts out the people who are just doing the small acts of bravery on a daily basis that are completely
Mm,
overlooked. That, because
right.
not what we consider brave or courageous. I mean, as an example, some people might argue that like our podcast and the way we talk openly and honestly, like that could be an act of courage. But I don't define it that way because I don't feel like it's particularly hard for me to do it. It's
Mm-hmm.
hard for me to promote it. That's a different thing.
Mm-hmm.
But for me to have this conversation doesn't feel hard. It doesn't feel like I'm being brave, even if someone else is defining it as such.
Right.
And I think I guess what I was getting at was just like it's sad to me because I think there are people who are they are truly being courageous every moment of every day,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not being recognized because the thing that they need courage to do is stuff that we just kind of assume everyone should just do. Like for people who are struggling mentally, for instance, like an act
Mm-hmm.
of courage might be just getting out of bed and facing the day.
Mm-hmm.
But they'll never be, no one's celebrating that. We're only
Right.
celebrating these like big acts of bravery or whatever. And I find that so annoying.
Yeah, I think that's a really brilliant point. And I was reading this book called Courage is Calling by Ryan Holiday. And one of the things that he talks about is this idea of how we separate like physical courage from mental courage, but they're really the same
Right.
thing. I think that's kind of what you're touching on, where we celebrate these really big, obvious acts of courage. So something like, a person going into a burning building is a very extreme example, but somebody
Right.
who runs into a burning building to save somebody else, that is very like legitimately an act of courage. But that's the kind of thing that we look for, people going and competing in the Olympics or following their dreams or doing these really big things. But I think you're so right that there are these small acts of courage, small, and I mean small as in in terms of the actual thing that's being done, but in terms of how it feels for the person doing it, it
Yes.
feels just as big. Like, I think that's a great example.
Yeah.
Like the act of getting out of bed, for people who are suffering with severe depression, I know I've heard that they really struggle to just feed themselves, to just
Yeah.
shower, to just like take care of themselves, which is definitely something for people who are neurotypical just take for granted. But that is such an act of courage to, when you feel like there's no reason to get up in the morning and do anything, you do it anyway. And so I'm wondering then about centering courage more on the feeling, like the feeling
Yes.
for the
Yeah.
person. It's very much an
Yeah.
internal thing. And actually, I have a quote here from Courage is Calling. Courage is the management of and the triumph over fear. So and you could extend that, I think, even just overcoming anything that feels uncomfortable, that feels bad. So when you feel overwhelmed or too tired to do something that you need to do, and you push past that, I think that if we can think about courage in that scale, I think it probably make a lot more people feel like they are actually courageous enough to do some of the bigger things.
Well, and this is and you put it really well. It is like we define courage based on like the external versus the internal.
Yeah.
And like you just said, it means that there's a bunch of people who are in essence very courageous people,
Mm-hmm.
but because we don't define courage as a society on the internal,
Mm-hmm.
they will never be validated for that.
Mm-hmm. And how much of that is a symptom of us lacking empathy and compassion for others? That we are still failing to recognize that for some people doing, again, for what maybe if we're using the example of mental health, for people who are neurotypical doing certain things, it comes so easily to them, they don't think about it. But for some people, they struggle so much, but you can't see their struggle. Maybe you can in terms of being able to see some of the outward effects of them not being able to do certain things. But we never look at them and think, wow, they're really brave to just keep getting up and going, keep picking themselves up and going rather than making judgments, which tends to be what happens where, you know, those are the people who get deemed lazy and, you know, that people will say they lack a strong work ethic or they lack discipline or whatever. Really, it's just they're crumbling inside and we just can't see it.
Yeah, it could be a lack of empathy. I also think that we like the sensational things.
That's
and
true.
For someone to say like, oh, you know, like I decided to really live my truth and I divorced my husband and I started this business and like all these things like that. That as a story we find more appealing. It's more sensational than I got out of bed this morning, which in terms of internal courage, it could actually be the same amount that's needed. Who knows? Like, I don't know. But one story just sounds more sensational.
Yeah, that is very true.
And I think and this is where I really dislike social media and LinkedIn in particular. I really, really, really dislike LinkedIn because I think people craft this kind of story to make their lives appear this sensational. And I want more authentic, honest people in this world who say it like it is instead of crafting this image. And I want to see a world where we actually do celebrate this quote unquote small acts of courage.
It's like the quiet courage.
Yeah, it is. That is something because, you know, I talked about what was that?
It was inspiration, I think. We were talking about the loud and the quiet inspiration, I think.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, same sort of thing, right? Yeah, so like there's kind of where my mind went. And I think it is important to acknowledge that we will all have our own ways of feeling courageous and that will shift over time. So, you know, when I first started sharing my artwork way back, like that, at that time, that felt courageous to me. And it feels less so now.
Yeah.
Because I've gotten a bit more used to it. But right now, the thing that is feeling truly courageous is sitting down and actually like getting real with myself and acknowledging like my inner truth, like that stuff that I feel in my gut.
Yeah.
That's scary to kind of live by because it might kind of deviate from what is expected of me or what I think is expected of me. And right now, that is what it means to be courageous to me. But I think it's really important for everyone to realize that just because that's courageous to me doesn't mean that that's going to be courageous to you. And it's okay to get your sense of like feeling like a brave person or whatever from different things.
Yeah, of course.
Because that's another thing we see a lot, right? I think we see it particularly in kind of like the self-help genre are these sort of thought leaders who come out and they say like they, you know, like they kind of basically they realize they have this moment of realization that they haven't been living a life that's aligned with who they truly are. They just kind of like blow up their life and change everything overnight. And I think we read those stories and consume those stories. And I think or maybe it's just me, can start to fool ourselves into thinking that that's what I need to do to be courageous. But actually, that's not true. That's what they needed to do. But that doesn't mean that that's what I need to do. Anyways, I'm kind of talking in circles because, again, these are all like half processed thoughts that came half an hour before we started talking.
That's fine.
Apologies.
No, you have nothing to apologize for. I thought that was all really great. And it also sort of reminds me of something I've heard Cal Newport talk about where, you know, there's this idea that courage is the only thing you need. And I was reminded when you were talking about, you know, these people who like blow up their whole lives. And there's something very exciting about that. There's, you know, people want that moment of like messing everything up and just doing something really big because it feels exciting in the moment. But, you know, Cal is a big proponent of doing things slowly, like really thinking about exactly what it is you want and then taking the next logical step and moving towards that. So you're still crafting a life that you want, but not just thinking you need the courage to go and just like quit your job because that might not be the best thing. maybe the courage in that case could come from sticking with it and then also starting something else.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
because that is, for a lot of people, that's going to be really hard to know. And I mean, because I've been there where you know what you want to do, but you are stuck where you are, and you have to find a way to keep showing up for this other thing, even though you don't want to anymore. And there's obviously a variety of reasons why that would be for different people, but you know, that's just as valid too, you know, to look, if you're in a position to completely blow up your life and that works, do that, I guess. But, you know, I think too, sometimes generally, I think those really, really big changes, they happen realistically, they happen gradually.
That's right.
It's about really being able to cultivate the courage you need to take those daily steps, to keep doing it, even when you aren't necessarily seeing those results right away. And I think that's where we get a lot of pleasure out of the immediacy of having something like, oh, I've left my spouse and I've left my job and I've moved across the country. And like, sometimes those things are what you need to do. But I think not having more of a plan around that is a mistake, probably, for a lot of people.
Well, and you bring up a really good point. Like, when we hear these stories, we are hearing the end of the story. Mm-hmm. But there was all sorts of little things that were happening along the way that led to that big moment, that big point in the story.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really interesting point. And it does feed that need for us, for that instant gratification. Mm-hmm. And our brains are wired to like a certain story structure,
right?
Like the hero's journey, right?
Yeah.
Like that's existed like forever. I don't know where it originated from, whatever, but it's just, we like those stories with those big moments of conflict, and then we see that point of arrival afterwards. Mm-hmm. I guess I feel like it makes me feel a little sad, I guess, because that story structure is just a story structure. Mm-hmm. And so it's like we're trying to craft, or like we're trying to look for moments like that in our own lives or something. And I'm speaking, of course, from my own perspective. And so maybe this isn't how people kind of conceptualize their life, but it's just interesting because that's the kind of narrative you sort of see other people perpetuating or continuing or whatever, or fitting their story within.
Yeah. 100%. I think people like to see things just be nice and neat and tidy because it makes them feel like that's what has to be done, rather than seeing the discomfort and the mess and the chaos that can come from really needing to make those kinds of changes, and that it tends to take a long time.
Isn't it interesting how, and again, I know you're like this and I know I'm like this. I don't know if everyone's like this, but I get a sense that people are, this kind of like deep-rooted need to create order from chaos.
Yeah.
And that's just, it's such an interesting instinct.
Yeah, that which 100% explains our need for a story, because it makes sense of something that is really not so clean cut. You know, and I think we are absolutely all guilty of doing that in our lives, with the lives of others, you know, because it makes things feel simple rather than embracing the truth that things are pretty messy and things don't always make sense. And sometimes things take way longer than you think they're supposed to. Because weren't we supposed to all get jobs right out of college and then get married right away and then start a family and then live happily ever after? Wasn't that what we were supposed to get? So is it us maybe trying to chase this fairy tale we were sold that we were never able to fulfill?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, I think part of it too is like, as a species, we have a sense of our own mortality, and I think that could come into play as well. And because we have such an awareness of the things around us and the things happening to other people and things like that, like I think like you said, like it's a way of simplifying the complicated. And I think things are just so complex. We have an awareness of the complexity that our brains just can't deal with it. And so we have to kind of create these linear stories and paths and stuff like that so that our brains can work. I don't know. Anyways, it's completely off topic, but it really is quite fascinating to me. But yeah, so like, I don't have a lot to say about courage other than my frustration with the way society doesn't really acknowledge it, which is typical me.
Yeah. And for something that is so essential for us to do the things we need to do and that we want to do. And the idea in Courage is Calling is that we all are called to something and that it requires courage to follow through. So like I talk all the time about how music is my calling. And that takes a degree of courage to, I think I've talked before, I've spent a lot of years going without a lot of things and making a lot of sacrifices and making all these trade-offs because I felt called to this thing. And maybe you could argue that there was some level of courage there, but I also know that in order for me to get to the next place I need to be, I need to draw on more courage because I'm letting my fear or my doubts or whatever my hangups are get in the way of me doing the things I know will likely help me get to that next level. And so I've been thinking a lot in terms of cultivating courage. I wrote a blog post about this not too long ago, inspired by this book. And there's a few little things I've jotted down here. So one is to think about fear as a signal that there's something there to learn. So our general response when we feel fear is to avoid the thing that we're afraid of, which, I mean, is definitely something that has served us well. It has a biological function. It's part of what has kept us alive, kept our species alive. But we tend to feel that fear around things that we don't need to be afraid of. So something like taking a chance on like applying for a job you want, or going and traveling somewhere, moving to a new city, doing like any number of things that you feel that fear when you think about doing it. You can take that as an indicator that there's probably something good there. And so if we can start to learn how to sit with our fear, not as something to be avoided, but something that can be listened to, that can be followed, that might open us up to being more willing to go and take some chances. Because really, ultimately, a lot of the things that we try will succeed, like little things especially. Maybe you're afraid to go take a class and then you go take a class and then it goes really well or you learn something new or whatever. And then you feel like, oh, that's a success. So then you become more accustomed to being able to follow through in that fear. Or you take a chance and something fails. But as we've talked about, like failure is not something to be afraid of. Failure is something that is a byproduct of trying things that are challenging. It's a sign that we have pushed ourselves and that we've learned something. And if you can take as many lessons as possible from that failure, you're just going to do better the next time. So really, and again, we can take it to the extreme of if somebody's afraid of skydiving, yes, there's a lot of, you could die. There are certain things like sometimes failure means death. So that's the kind of thing that maybe if that's not your jam, don't do it. I'm never going to do anything like that. It's not my highest joy. So, so again, I just want to acknowledge that so nobody's saying, well, sometimes failure is death. Yes, I am aware. Sometimes if you go swimming with sharks, failure might mean that you lose a leg or something.
It's kind of interesting because that I like what you said there about fear as being an indicator that there's something to learn. But the first thing I thought of was with me, there's an interesting thing because of my anxiety, there's fear that pops up a lot. For me, I need to distinguish between different types of fears. There's the fear of trying something new, but then there's just that anxious fear that is completely irrational and there's nothing to learn there. It's just an irrational response that my brain has because I'm wired to be anxious about everything.
Right.
So just flagging that as kind of an interesting. Emotions are hard to, like for me, emotions are very hard to follow in that way. Like I love that idea of like fear is an indicator, similar to how people say like listen to your gut,
Yeah.
Like I love that idea, and I wish that I could be someone who could trust my own internal emotions to that extent. But because of all the other mental stuff I've got going on, I can't take it at face value like that. I have to like analyze and it's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely a challenge trying to sift through your emotions. I think for anybody, but especially for someone like you with a lot of anxiety, it's going to be difficult to know. It's kind of like playing, a video game and you're fighting a guy and then they will cast like some kind of a spell and then there's like duplicates of them and then you're like, I don't know
Right.
which is the real one.
Exactly.
So
Right. That's
it's like, I don't know
exactly
which is the
it.
real fear and which is just the fear being conjured by my brain. And yeah.
Exactly it. Exactly it. And that extends to other things too. But yeah, that's sometimes what it feels like. Like, what is real here?
Yeah.
And that can be really hard to figure out.
Yeah. Is that something you've explored? Like, do you try to sit down when you're having a moment of anxiety to see where that's coming from?
No, I don't know. I don't know. I think for the most part, I can kind of recognize when it's just irrational anxiety. Yeah, I try, and I have to try hard not to act on the impulse to avoid in those situations.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's legitimate times where I've bailed on things because I'm scared something bad is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Like, which is, yeah, so I have to kind of force myself not to, like, I have to challenge that irrational fear by doing the thing that is triggering it. But I think because oh, I don't know. What was your question again?
Yeah, just wondering about like if you actively or if you have spent time sitting down trying to sort through your anxiety when it hits or your fear when it hits, like to try to decipher.
I think I just always am. I think that dialogue is always just going on in my brain with everything I'm thinking. My brain is very noisy.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of stuff going on there. So I think,
Yeah.
and because I'm what's the word? Pretty self-aware.
Mm-hmm.
And introspective. I think I'm just always having that conversation with myself.
Right.
But it's not, even though I'm always engaged in that conversation with myself, it's still not necessarily clear as, like things are still kind of fuzzy as to like, is this rooted in anxiety, or is this rooted in true discomfort, or like is this really going against who I am at my core, or is this just an anxious response? And it can be hard to untangle that.
Mm-hmm.
So I just do the best I can.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And I know this is something I've talked about before, the idea of Premeditatio malorum, which is a concept in Stoicism. It's the premeditation of evils. And this is the idea that you imagine the bad things that can happen, and not from a place of, where you can just worry about it and go, oh, obviously I'm going to get on this plane and it's going to crash. I'm going to die out in the ocean.
Funny that you mentioned that.
Oh, no, that's right.
Because that has been with my upcoming trip. I almost didn't book it. Oh, no. And if I think too much about it, I get sick about going on the airplane because I'm like convinced that it's going to crash. So
okay, so an example that's not that on the nose. So I'm trying to think of something that you just would not do. Or something that's like, I don't know, really, I don't know.
Skydiving. I wouldn't go skydiving.
I was trying to think, like, you're going and sitting at the park and feeding pigeons, but one of the pigeons is like feral, and then it goes, I don't know. I was trying to think of something.
I like where this is going, though.
I was like trying to think of something where it's like nothing bad would happen typically, but then you just take it somewhere and it just goes. And
yeah.
Anyways,
yeah.
So
you mean bringing it to like a really irrational place in your head?
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, you don't want to go somewhere irrational. The idea is you take something, and because we tend to catastrophize. So this is the kind of thing that would happen. You're like, what's the worst that could happen if I went to the park to feed the pigeons? And then somehow it ends up with like
death,
Armageddon.
Obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, the tanks are rolling in, and so, all because you went to the park to feed the pigeons. But that's the kind of thing that realistically is probably not going to happen. So you can sit down with a piece of paper and work out exactly like what are the things that can happen. Of course, that you can go something more extreme, like, for somebody who has a business, like, well, what if I lose all my customers, and what if this happens, and so we kind of spiral. And the idea is to take control of that fear and to write out exactly like what is the actual worst that could happen, and then try to figure out if there are things you can do preemptively to mitigate any damage that could happen from anything that would happen, so that you can go in with more confidence, and so that you can go and do the thing that you're afraid of doing. So like an example for people listening here who are maybe afraid to share their music or their art, if you're thinking, oh man, I'm going to put this out and everybody's going to hate it and I'm never going to be able to put out anything again and people are going to laugh at me and all of that, that's a little bit of that imposter syndrome too.
Yeah.
If instead you can sit down and actually write out like what's the absolute worst anybody could do, really. Somebody says something bad about what you've put out. At the end of the day, I mean, it hurts, but it's just words, and it's something you have to learn how to get over if you want to be in the world. There's just no way to avoid being seen if you want to do anything of meaning in this world. So that's something you have to figure out how to get over, which would bring us to another tip, which would be, or not even, just a strategy you can use to cultivate more courage, which is to just do courageous acts. And again, I love that you brought up the idea of like small courageous acts, because that adds up. If you can make a habit of doing the things that scare you, and that could be, for some people, that can be just going out and going to the store. That can be a challenge. Anything you can do that starts to help exercise that muscle will really help. And it can be anything. And so again, if we're bringing it back to art, it could be something really small. Maybe you just share a painting or a song with a few friends and you just start there. And then you just keep doing that. And what happens is that courage is kind of like the saying that mood follows action. So the idea that, oh, I'm going to wait until I'm motivated to do the thing is just not how it works. It's the other way around. You gain motivation by doing the thing. You gain courage by taking action. So if you can start taking action, the courage will follow. And it also puts you in a position
it snowballs.
Exactly. Like, very much so.
Snowballs. Yeah.
Exactly. You get that momentum and then you get to a point where things are rolling and then you can really just focus on what's in front of you. So it's kind of a balance between something like fear setting and Premeditatio, malorum, where you're thinking ahead and sort of being prepared, but you're really also focused in the moment with what you're doing. So it's sort of having that balance so that you're putting yourself in the future a little bit, but primarily focusing in the present and just taking those steps forward.
I think another thing to add here too is that to be courageous takes a lot of energy and is hard to do. But once, like if we're talking about something like sharing your artwork, it'll take a lot for you to do that initially. And then you'll do it and you'll feel great about that. Mm-hmm. And then it's easier next time. It takes less courage to do it next time. So I think sometimes it can feel a little bit overwhelming because it's like, oh man, it's going to take, like, it's this hard for me to do this right now. Is it going to just keep being this hard? And that's not, in my experience, that hasn't been the case. You take that small step. It's really hard initially, and then it gets easier and easier. And then it's no longer an act of courage for you to put your stuff out there because now it's just the thing that you do. And that's why, circling back to what I was saying about like what it is to be courageous is going to shift for you over time.
Definitely. Yeah.
It's not stagnant. It doesn't stay the same. Yeah. So that's something to keep in mind too. There's another thought I had, but I have completely lost it. So anyways, continue.
Well, yeah, you just made me think about, how we have this idea that we are one way or we're not. So somebody is like either courageous or they're not. So this totally changes that notion. What it means is that your degree of courageousness is going to shift over time, depending on what you're doing. So if you are actively doing things that require courage, that set point for you is going to keep shifting and shifting and shifting. And then those things that feel incredibly scary right now aren't going to feel that scary. They're going to feel like the next logical challenge for your courage.
Yeah. I think the other thing too, that was the thing I was going to say, was you really do need to pause and celebrate those little acts of courage
Yeah,
that you kind of live on a daily basis, like those things that no one else is really acknowledging as being courageous. I think it's really important that we acknowledge that for ourselves. And I would argue that, taking those small steps and doing those small courageous acts is also an act of self-care, I would argue.
definitely. Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, because we've talked about how self-care, like the actual process of taking care of yourself is very broad, like the sorts of things you can do, because we have, again, societally a very narrow idea of what self-care means. But
Yeah.
often it's doing the things that are hard because there is a version of you that really wants you to take that step.
And I think, again, like when we act with courage, it feels really good afterwards. We feel
Yeah.
proud of ourselves. And
Yeah.
that feeling, if we take a moment and
Yes.
acknowledge what we
Yeah.
did and recognize what we did and give ourselves kudos for doing that hard thing,
Yeah.
then that kind of self-love, self-compassion after the fact, like that right there is self-care. Like that
For
feeling.
sure. For sure. Yeah.
Because you're acknowledging yourself and you're giving
Mhm.
yourself permission to do hard things and you're trusting that you can do hard things and all of that stuff is
Yeah.
is self-care.
Yeah. Yeah. It's such a different place to operate from versus trying to do these things because you feel like you're a failure if you don't.
Yeah.
Versus saying, I'm somebody who can do this. And look, I did it. And that's really great.
Right.
And I'm going to do it again tomorrow with something else. And yeah, have that moment of acknowledgement.
Yeah.
So something else that helps is just being prepared. Again, like a music performance is a really good example. So it takes courage to get up on stage and perform, but you'll have a lot more confidence in yourself if you've practiced. I think we've all been to like gigs where people obviously haven't practiced, or like children's piano recitals, and they haven't practiced, and then they're all really nervous.
Guilty.
And it's like, well, yeah. And well, if you'd practice more, you would be not so nervous. I mean, there's still always going to be some level of nerves until that becomes something that you just get comfortable doing. And probably always, I think some people always have stage fright. But if you are really well prepared, you are going to have a much easier time. And it's this idea, again, from Courage is Calling: repetition leads to confidence, and confidence leads to courage.
Yeah. But I guess I would caution a bit too, though, because if you have that sort of perfectionistic tendency,
I have this exact note right under here.
Yeah.
But don't wait forever to put yourself out there. Because I got caught in that spiral for a long time where I was like, I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet. So I spent years locked away in the darkness just practicing because I felt like I wasn't good enough. So yes, perfectionists have to be careful about that. It's always a balance.
It's a
always
balancing
what it comes
act.
down to. Yeah.
And I think what you're kind of getting at is like if it might help make it, if it's really just like you want to do this thing, but like the courage you're going to need is it's just so much energy that you're going to need to actually force yourself to do this thing, then a way to kind of reduce the amount of energy you're going to need is to just kind of prepare yourself a bit more. And then the more you kind of prepare yourself, the less it will take for you to put yourself out there.
Yeah.
But I think, like you said, the important thing to note is that it's never going to be easy. So you can't prepare yourself and just keep preparing, hoping that at some point, all of a sudden it's going to be easy for you to do that thing.
No.
Like that's not the case. And if that were the case, then you would do the thing and it wouldn't feel nearly as rewarding because it's not hard anymore, right? So yeah, balancing act for sure.
So something you might want to do if you are a musician who wants to go play live is go try to schedule a show or go sign up for an open mic ahead of time. Not obviously, depending on the open mic, some of them you have to sign up as you get there. But if you can, or find some way to make a commitment for a live performance and then prepare like crazy for it. Like make sure you're really well prepared, but then you have no way to wiggle out of it. Yes, you have to do it. So it's really that sort of idea is be well prepared because you're going to feel much more confident, but understand that you are probably always going to feel some degree of fear or anxiety, depending on your personality. A lot of that's going to, some people are fine and some people, are many, many decades into a professional career as a performer and they're still throwing up before a performance because they're so nervous. So, some people are just wired that way and then you just learn how to deal with it. But from my experience playing live, it gets easier and gets less stressful the more you do it. So
That's my experience with playing live music as well.
Yeah. You do a lot of live music performances, Robyn.
Yep, in my head. And
How
the
do they-
crowd
how do
loves
they
me
end?
every
Oh,
time.
So it's like a reverse anxiety thing where it's not the worst possible outcome. It's like the best possible outcome.
Yeah, that's right. That's how I set up my life so that I'm not disappointed.
How's that working out for you?
Not great.
Do as we say, not as we do.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that's it. So something I made note of is that for me personally, I think my big sticking point right now is I just have to do some things.
Yeah, that's
I'm
me
as
well.
prepared. Yeah, I'm as prepared as I could be for the stuff I'm trying to do right now. Obviously, I'm always going to still be practicing and working and learning and growing. That's never going to stop. But I'm at a point where I know what I have to do. I just have to do it. And I have to make it be something that I can just do very easily. It still feels like I'm exercising that muscle because I'm doing something to put something out into the world. So I want something that feels like I'm exercising that muscle, but it's not too huge. So it's not too overwhelming, because I think that's where I'm sitting right now. Is I feel like I want to do this thing, and then my mind is imagining this huge obstacle to overcome, and I just don't know where to start. But if I can break it down and just take a step today, I think that'll get me going in that direction.
I'm still kind of thinking about your point on preparing yourself before sort of taking action.
Mm-hmm.
The context shifts depending on what we're talking about. Like, I think there's some truth there when we're talking about tangible things, like performing live, or in my case, like doing an art show. Like, yeah, like when you're super, like, it's an act of courage for you to even participate in this thing. So, like, do yourself a favor, prepare as much as possible beforehand. But I think there's that's a tangible thing. And I think in some cases you can't prepare. I think in some cases it is just a matter of, like, you have to do the thing.
Yeah, I think especially for, like, internal things. Like, how do you prepare to live your truth? You
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So just kind of flagging that, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. That's definitely contextual.
Yeah. And I think, like, for you, it's tricky because, like, you set your own, it's easier almost when you have an external thing to hold you accountable. Like, you sign up to do an art show. So, like, you have to, there's no risk of waiting until everything's perfect because you've signed up for the show and it's happening on this date. So you're going to be going and you're going to feel some level of unpreparedness. Mm-hmm. But I think for us, with some of the things we're doing where we're only accountable to ourselves, it's even like that, being courageous and just doing the thing. It's so much harder because there's no accountability.
Yeah, that's probably
we get to make up our own rules and stuff. So it means, like, we can stretch the deadline, so we can keep pushing things, or we can keep adding in projects to kind of delay us actually releasing anything, or, you know what I mean? Like, it's
I know Bob Reynolds has talked about this, where he'll have an album that's done and he keeps sitting on it. So he'll just, like, he'll open his calendar and just pick a day and be like, this is the day it's coming out. And then he has to get it ready to release. So that, I think this is the idea behind, like, setting a deadline, is being like, this is the day I have to release this thing, or this is the day, and then making an announcement to the world or something like that, so that you have, you're creating your own accountability that's outside of yourself. Because otherwise, you're exactly right. It's so easy. And I've been so guilty of this, where you just keep pushing things back and you keep filling up your time with things that are legitimately productive, but it's not that thing that you really want to get out there. And some of this,
so easy to do.
Yeah. And, some of this might tie into, what Stephen Pressfield calls the resistance. Have you ever read The War of Art?
I did, but I don't ever remember the books that I read. And,
okay.
I remember really liking it, but
yeah, it's definitely, it's a short one. So you might want to give it another read through, because he talks about that resistance we feel. I think he talks more specifically to doing the work of creating, like all the things we do to keep ourselves away from the thing we really want to do.
So, yeah.
But it just made me think of that, even as far as, I mean, I guess as far as like seeing things through to the end, I'm great at starting things. I'm terrible at finishing things.
Yes. Yeah.
I have so many ideas and they all seem really great. And so I'm going to try to start all of them. But how many of them get finished?
Well, and I think that's part of the reason. And I'm the same way, right? I have so many ideas, and that's the funnest part, is coming up with all these ideas.
Yeah, I love it.
And new projects, and like, yeah, it is the best.
It's the novelty.
And then I got to a point where, and there's all something about them that has merit, that is worth exploring. And I got to the point where I realized I'm just spinning my wheels, and I'm coming up with these ideas, and I'm getting sidetracked by the shiny object. And then at some point, a year goes by, and then I'm circling back to a main idea again. And it's like, and I'm realizing like, I'm just going in circles without actually moving anything forward. And I think once you kind of have that realization, and well, it's a combination of having that realization and then having that kind of fire lit, that you're like, I'm just tired of being this way.
Yeah.
And that's when you can kind of start to focus and take a more staged approach. So like I have one kind of set goal, and then, or one set project, and then a sort of a side project. And then I have all these other things that I want to do, but it's just like, I'll come up with ideas for each thing. I'll put that idea on paper, and then I just shelve it. And it's like, that's not for now.
Yeah.
And creating those really, really like strict boundaries in my mind about what I can focus my energy on and what needs to be kind of just put on the shelf for later.
Yeah.
It's one of the most annoying things.
Yeah.
It's just like the amount of ideas, and the desire to, I can't talk today, the desire to like chase everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's stimulating to have a new idea, and the excitement, you get this push from that. We always have this initial excitement that comes from a new idea or a new project or a new hobby or a new whatever. And that gives you that momentum. It's sort of like playing Mario Kart, when you get that little boost at the beginning and you go,
yes.
New ideas are like that. It's much harder to do on your third lap when you've been hit by a bunch of shells and you've run into banana peels. It's really hard to want to keep going. But the thrill of that initial blast forward can really,
if you get it. I always miss it. I always press the button for too long, and then I peter out.
I got it no problem on the Nintendo 64 version. The one that I play with you and Mike, I don't think I've gotten it once. I don't know what that wizardry is. Oh, you're gonna have to show me. I know how.
Time. Nope, I don't tell anyone.
I guess I can always just look it up on the internet. I always forget to just do that.
Yeah.
Google.
Mike has asked me too. He's like, how do you do that? And I have the timing down, but I'm like, I'm not telling anyone because it's my only advantage. That's the kind of person I am.
That's yeah, that makes sense.
I hoard knowledge. Keep it secret because it's my advantage.
Just like pushing other people out of the way. It's like, no, this is mine. So yeah, lesson to everybody, don't play Mario Kart. I think is what I'm getting at. It's very stressful. Play the old Mario Kart. That made sense. Maybe I'm just getting old. I feel like there's too much happening. It's too crazy. Why don't you just drive around a track like you used to? Unless I'm just not remembering it right.
My memories of playing the Nintendo 64 version is like constantly getting turned around because I was so young and not good at video games, or wanting to like go and explore different areas. And so I drive off the track for a while until it would kind of like reroute you onto the track. Yeah.
Did you ever play Diddy Kong Racing?
No. So I didn't play a lot because my brothers are so much older than me. So they would kind of play with each other and I would watch. And sometimes they'd give me a controller to play because I'd really want to play. But they didn't want me to like mess up with what they were doing. So they would give me a controller, but it just wasn't plugged in. And so I kind of like, and I think I knew that. And I think I would just pretend that I was one of them. And I would just be like, pressing the buttons and moving the joystick.
Have we just dug up some childhood trauma? Is there something left over from that's maybe messing you up a little bit?
I think that was pretty harmless. I mean, I look back on that and it's like, that makes sense. Like I could see how you would do that, as like, because my brothers are like 6 and 9, like, 6 and 9 years older than me. So
right. Yeah.
I just think it's kind of hilarious. But they were good. They would play. And like I remember playing 007, or GoldenEye.
Yeah.
And my oldest brother was always very good at encouraging me. I'm sure I was terrible, but he was always like, and I'm sure he made it really easy for me to get him. But he was always like, "Oh yeah, you're really good at this game," and I felt like I was good at that game, but I'm sure I was absolutely horrendous.
Is that why you were so frustrated the last time me, and Mike played? Because you were like, I thought I was better than this.
Genuinely, yes. When I played that again, I was like, "That's so weird." I used to be so good at this game, and then I realized that no, I never was good. It was all just a lie.
Secrets and
my
lies.
Whole childhood. I've liked this conversation. I like how we've gone completely. This has shifted to a video game discussion. Perfect.
I mean, I'm sure there's some courage required in playing certain games. So, I mean, GoldenEye is no joke. When you play with people who are really good at it, it's pretty tricky, but also very fun.
It's also really hard to play those old video games.
It's very, yeah.
Like the camera and stuff. Like it's just crazy how challenging it is.
It feels very awkward, yeah.
I tried playing Zelda. What was the one? What was the Nintendo
Ocarina of Time?
Zelda? Yeah. And I couldn't. I was like, I don't know how to make this character move around. This is ridiculous.
I think for some of those older games, they're better left to just your nostalgia brain than to try to play them again. Some still hold up. Like I played the Super Nintendo Donkey Kong Country and Donkey Kong Country 2 a few years back, and they held up. They were still really fun. Mario RPG 2, the Super Nintendo version, was very good. But yeah, some of those Nintendo 64 I find are really challenging to play. I think because it's like we're so used to the 3D games we have now that are so sophisticated and, you know, with the graphics and the controls. And so to play one of those games, it can feel very, very primitive in a way that like the Super Nintendo and even like the Nintendo ones just don't. I think our expectation is different.
Well, it's interesting because like I felt so frustrated. I was like, I should be smarter now. I should be more capable of playing this now than I was when I was 7 years old. But somehow I'm not getting it and I'm not able to make this work. And that just doesn't seem, it seems like against nature.
Yeah. So yeah, starting new projects is way more exciting. And in the same way that it is more exciting to play a new game than it is to play an old game often.
That is a great way of linking everything we just talked about. I am impressed.
But yeah, it takes a certain level of discipline, at least for me, and it sounds like that's the case for you, like setting those boundaries where you can actually get stuff done. And I think that's essential to give yourself some kind of boundaries in order to take those small, courageous steps. Again, in ways that make sense. When it comes to something very tangible, that is the case. Obviously, when it comes to things that are much more internal, like being honest with yourself and all of that, that's something else. And that's the kind of thing that I think for a lot of people, they would just benefit from having either a support group or having a therapist or having somebody who they could work through those things with to help sort through any of the chaos that's going on inside. And that would lend sort of a certain level of tangibility perhaps to that kind of thing. Even something like journaling can be helpful, has been helpful for me in sorting through some stuff.
Yeah. And just like, so I had a moment this week where I had to be honest with myself, and it was really scary. It was, because it wasn't so much that I was having to be honest with myself. It was having to actually acknowledge something that subconsciously I've known all along. But I had to acknowledge it.
Yeah.
And when you acknowledge it, like you can't, like my therapist always says, you can't unknow what you know.
Yeah, that is very true.
So, and when there is a truth in you, when there is something there that you have always subconsciously kind of been aware of, but have hidden it away because to acknowledge it is too hard and too painful. And you know, then as soon as you acknowledge it, you're not going to be able to unknow it. And then you're going to have to deal with it. Yeah. And that is extremely challenging to do. And I think that is a good example of like an internal, the internal courage that we need to have to be able to live lives that are authentic to us, to live our own life, right? And to be our own person. I think that is ultimately the most important kind of courage to have.
Yes.
But it is so, so hard. So, and one thing and I don't know if this might be helpful to other people who might be in kind of a similar situation. What I found helpful, because I had this moment where it's like, I kind of, this moment where I'm like, I have to acknowledge this. I have to be
Mm-hmm.
honest here and acknowledge this thing. And I didn't want to because it meant that I would have to take action.
Yeah.
And that was the thing that was preventing me from acknowledging it in the first place, was because then you have a responsibility to take action and to change something.
Mm-hmm.
So I gave myself permission in that moment that I'm going to acknowledge this thing, but I give myself permission to not take action right away.
Mm-hmm.
And just because I know this and I know this truth and I've acknowledged this truth doesn't mean I have to make any changes right now.
Yeah.
I just need to acknowledge. And that made it possible for me to bring it into my conscious mind essentially and let it live
Mm-hmm.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, life is interesting. I think it's important for us just to always maintain like a curiosity about our own brains and our own ways of
Yeah.
thinking
Yeah.
and the thoughts that pop up, and then just gentle, like be compassionate with ourselves as these sorts of like inner truths emerge and form. Like just don't rush to you don't have to rush to fix anything. Just let things kind of be for a bit and give yourself time to just kind of figure things out and piece things together.
Yeah. I think you're exactly right. I think that compassion piece of the puzzle is so important. I'm definitely having to pull out the stops to get myself to be extra compassionate. Is I'm having, things coming up too. So I think, yeah, it's you're exactly right. I think for people to give themselves that space. And I love what you said about giving yourself permission to just not take action right away, because I
Yeah,
think that is probably something that does deter a lot of us from acknowledging
absolutely.
truths about ourselves,
Absolutely.
because we feel like, well, once that cat's out of the bag, like I got to do something
Yes.
about it. And in reality, I think for so many of us, just the act of acknowledging something does provide huge relief if you can just give that to yourself and not harbor any additional expectations until you're at a point where you're ready to do that, because that's a whole other thing.
That's right.
Taking action in general is a challenging thing, but when it's linked to some kind of big, degree of honesty, that's even harder. So if you can separate those things, I think what you said there is really, really will be really helpful for a lot of people. I'm definitely going to keep that in mind for the
Well,
future.
it's all about choices too,
Yeah.
right? And there's no rule. Like, let's say we were to all of a sudden, like, we've known that the job we've been working isn't good for us or whatever. Like, we've known that on a subconscious level, but we haven't wanted to truly acknowledge it because that would mean that we would be sacrificing our benefits and we'd have to find a new job, blah, 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 right? Like, this is just a really tame example.
Yeah.
Just because you acknowledge the fact that, this job is really bad for me doesn't mean that you now need to choose to find a new job.
Mm-hmm.
That's not, it just, you get to choose.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can choose to continue to work this job for years and years and years. It's totally up to you. There are no rules. So I think, yeah, just but to bury this stuff and to like shove it down deep, it I think ultimately causes more harm than to
Mm-hmm.
acknowledge it and consciously make a choice to continue doing that thing that you've acknowledged isn't the best for you.
Yeah.
Like, and that sounds, I'm sure there's lots of people who disagree with me, but I don't necessarily think that things are that black and white where
No,
it's like,
I agree with you. I think
like,
it's so much better to just acknowledge the gray area and just to acknowledge the nuance.
yeah, and to like and to know, like, it's okay to know that the thing you're doing isn't really the best for you, and it's okay to know that, and but also not know how to get yourself out of it, so you have to kind of choose to continue that way for a while. Like,
Yeah.
that's okay to be in that spot. It's
Yeah.
uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But I think there's so many of us who are in that spot,
Yeah.
and it's just kind of inevitable. I don't know.
Yeah, sort of forces us to face being in that messy middle where now we've
That's it.
accepted. So we're
That's
no longer
it.
in that place where we're denying the truth. We've accepted it, but we haven't actually taken action. So we have
Because
to.
we haven't figured it out yet.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, yeah, to get comfortable being in that liminal period where you just,
Yeah.
you're having to sit through that discomfort and through the potentially overwhelm and through the, you know, not knowing what to do next exactly.
Yeah.
And yeah. And that's a fine place to be in. You know, again, we, as we've talked about a lot, we're always comparing ourselves to people's like, you know, end game. We're seeing
Yes.
like where they are and thinking, oh, they've got it all sorted, not realizing probably everybody is in some way, shape, or form is kind of hanging out in that space. And if you just remind yourself that it's perfectly fine to be wherever you are, and that whatever courageous thing feels like the next best thing for you to do, just do that and just keep doing that, you know. And then when it feels like the right time to act, you will. And depending on what somebody's going through, because, you know, an example would be like somebody who's acknowledging that, you know, their drinking is a problem, like somebody who's an alcoholic. Maybe they acknowledge that, but it's another year before they get themselves to AA. Like, you know, that space is time that they needed.
Yeah.
You know, and then sometimes, and then you go and you get help, and a lot of people relapse and then they try again. You know, it's not clear cut, and it's not happily ever after. You know, it's it's an ongoing conversation you have to be having with yourself. And if the conversation is saying, yes, I'm ready to acknowledge this, but no, I'm not ready to do anything about it, that is just where you are.
Yeah. And I think there's just so much pressure on us that like once you acknowledge something is a problem, then you need to fix it and deal with it. Like I think there's a lot of pressure or expectation that is the course of events that should happen.
Yeah.
But it doesn't play out in that way necessarily. It doesn't play out with that immediacy necessarily. Like you're saying, it can take time.
Yeah. And I guess I would sort of just put this out there that I think for people whose thing is damaging other people, I would make fixing that a priority, just because when you are dealing, especially if you're somebody who is, for example, a parent, you have certain responsibilities. If we're talking about something that just affects you, then that's one thing. But again, I just wanted to sort of take into account that obviously for some people, realizing something that they're doing is maybe causing other people pain is good incentive to maybe hurry up the healing process as far as that goes. Again, it's going to be a lot messier than that, but I think when other people are involved,
the stakes are higher when other people
exactly,
are involved.
Yeah. But also still having that self-compassion and knowing that it's not going to be easy, but that, you know, if there are other people depending on you, that needs to be something you take into account. Anyways, yeah, otherwise, you know, I'm sure, again, a lot of the people listening to our podcast, you'll probably be people dealing with a lot of the same things we are, where it's very like introspective. It's, you know, as far as personal development and art and all of that goes, you know, then yeah, take your time. There's no rush. And a couple other just I made some notes just from Courage is Calling that I thought were nice little add-ons. So there's one part that was talking about the difference between being scared and being afraid. And there's this quote from William Faulkner: "Be scared, you can't help that, but don't be afraid." And the distinction that was made here is that when you feel scared, it's this temporary rush of a feeling. So it's the feeling, maybe the feeling you have of first stepping out on stage in front of an audience, or when you go and you post that picture you've made, or whatever it is, that feeling of that rush of being scared, versus being afraid, which is more like a state of being. So being somebody who's just constantly afraid to live your life, afraid to do the things you really want to do, all of that. And I thought that was a really interesting distinction, and also an acknowledgement again that you're naturally going to feel scared of things, and that's
Right.
normal. Again, that's a physiological response that is something that has been essential to, you know, our thriving as a species, is that it's good for us to be scared of the saber-toothed tiger, because then we avoid it and we do not get eaten. But, you know, that long lingering fear that a lot of us feel, where we just live our lives in this constant state of fear because we're just not, like, we're just afraid of everything. I think that's a really devastating place to be in, as somebody who's spent a lot of time there.
Well, there's also like when it's that initial, like I'm thinking of like, you know, that fear of going on stage.
Yeah.
And then you go on stage and there's that high afterwards, right? Like there's always kind of a high after you sort of like,
Definitely.
quote unquote, defeat that moment of fear.
Yeah.
But when you're just afraid all the time, you never actually get that positive payoff.
Yeah, that's very true.
So it's just a miserable state to be in.
Yeah. Yeah, and the idea too, I like the idea that, you know, that we're all called to something and that we deprive the world of something if we don't answer that call. I feel that very heavily, as I'm, you know, again, constantly talking about this being my calling and still feeling like I'm not doing what I should be doing to really answer it. And that causes really interesting. All this tension.
That's not something that resonates with me, which is, no, I love the idea. It's a beautiful concept. It's just something that I don't, and I've heard other artists say this as well, but for whatever reason, it doesn't, I don't know why it doesn't resonate, but.
Maybe we've talked about this before in a really early episode, maybe when we were talking about our why.
Yeah,
and I talked about
I think it did.
Yeah, and I think when I talked about it being music being my calling, I don't think you shared that same sentiment personally, as far as you feeling that way about your art.
Yeah, and I don't really feel like I have a calling, like at all. Like that's something. Yeah, and that might just be kind of my own life philosophy. Like it's just part of, you know, some people believe that, and some people don't, and I guess I'm just one of those people who. Yeah, it just doesn't resonate with me, but I really do love the idea. I wish it did resonate with me. I feel like in many ways things would be easier if I felt that kind of like I was depriving the world of something. I feel like it would be easier to motivate myself to do things if I felt like I was depriving people otherwise, you know?
You'd think so, and yet I still fail to get myself to do the things I should be doing. So
okay.
So maybe you're better off, because all I feel is tension and anxiety, and like I'm not living my life to its fullest. So I mean, on the plus side, if I actually do the things I need to do, it'll probably be great. So, you know, it's a mixed bag, I guess.
We're all kind of feeling that, aren't we?
Yeah, probably. And this one final idea. So it doesn't matter who you are or what your track record is. So I guess you can think in terms of your track record previously in doing things that are courageous. What matters is the moment. So in the moment that you decide to do something courageous, then you get to fully claim that identity as, this is just me adding to it. You get to fully claim that identity as a courageous person.
Ooh.
And then you open up the floodgates to being able to creat that momentum.
I really like that, and not just in the context of courage, but in just as a philosophy generally, that you are not limited to the definition of you that applied yesterday.
Yeah.
Like don't limit yourself to that. Just because you've never done something super courageous before doesn't mean that you can't today.
Yeah.
I think because I fall into this trap of believing that the future version of me will be a certain way because that's how I've been in the past.
Yeah.
So believe, like, for a long time feeling like, oh, I'll never actually follow through on anything because I've never followed through on anything before.
Yeah.
And that's a big one. That's the one that I kind of keep circling back to. And I've managed to kind of get over that to an extent, which is nice. But, you know, just because that has applied for the past, like, well, in my entire adult life, doesn't mean that it will continue to be the case. And I think it's really important for us to, because the future is completely unknown and the past is known. Yeah. Don't define yourself based on what is known. Like, why do that? That's no fun. Unless what you've lived is amazing, then yeah,
Then
sure,
keep
continue.
going.
But
Yeah.
then keep going, ride that wave. But otherwise, like lean into the fact that the future is uncertain and
Yeah.
there is some fear there, but there's also opportunity because you can just you can do things differently. You have the power to make different choices.
Yeah.
That's a great one.
Yeah. I think that's where we have to end the conversation because that was perfectly said.
Yes.
You get the last word.
I love when things are perfectly said, particularly when I'm trying to say them because it rarely happens that I perfectly say something.
Yeah, I had a little something tucked away in the back of my mind, but then you said it and like, oh, you got it. You got the way I was trying to say it. So, yeah, you nailed it. So, what are your plans for the week? And sleep. That's a good idea. I'm wondering if we should each come up with something. We don't have to come up with it now, but we should each do something courageous this week and then report next week as to what we did.
Oh, yeah. I did my courageous thing last week, which was posting a little after after we recorded our episode on imposter syndrome. I did a little video of me talking on Instagram, which like I was so scared to do that, and I was pretty convinced because I was in the parking lot by the pet food store, and I thought like by the time I get home I'll delete it, and then I just kept it on there, and it's still on there. But that was my act of courage.
Yeah,
I've decided because it was hard to do. It was really hard to do. So
yeah, I wouldn't have the guts to do that at this point. So yeah, that's a great one. I think you win. Yeah. I don't think you'd have to do any more courageous acts for the month.
Year. Perfect.
Okay. Okay.
No more acts of courage for me. Perfect. Okay,
you did your one act of courage for the year. Okay, so sleep and that's it? That's it for you?
Yeah, well, the 100-day project is still going on. That's kind of it. I'm going to be taking a trip to Victoria in a week and a half, so I'll probably have to get some stuff ready for that. And yeah, but I think I'm just going to prioritize just kind of getting my head back in the game because I feel really like just off kilter.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good idea.
And you are not going to spend the week sick?
No, I better not. I have stuff to do, and I'm getting really antsy because I had a whole week of barely doing anything. Yeah, I feel more confident being able to say I'm going to get back into working on things and going to keep the momentum going and knocking things off my task list. That's one of the things I did this morning. I got up early and I did all my journaling and all of that. I did a meditation and I sat down and I wrote out my task list for the day. So I feel already that just made me feel better.
Yeah.
It's really, I think, just going to be a week of a lot of work. So I have my usual work that I have to do. Plus I have a lot of catch up because I have stuff that got, backlogged when I was not doing anything. So yeah, it's going to be a really busy week, I suspect, but I feel better. So I feel like I could probably handle it. And then, yeah, I mean, as far as doing something courageous, I feel like I'm going to post something to YouTube. I'm not sure. I have a couple ideas.
Yay!
I have sort of an idea that could launch into something else. So I think I'm going to do something. It's probably not going to be like, nobody get too super excited. It's not going to be a whole big thing. It's just, I know I need to get into the habit of putting stuff up on my channel. So
exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So I have some stuff that I can start posting that'll just get me going. So
right.
That's the idea. I think that's what I'll do. And yeah, I will update. So if anybody wants to follow me on YouTube, you could be the lucky 5th subscriber. For some inexplicable reason, I have 4 subscribers on a channel with 0 videos. So,
oh, interesting.
Yeah, I'm sure one of them is my mom. I'm not sure who the other ones are, but yeah, I'll put a link to my YouTube if anybody wants to subscribe and get notification when I post. Because that is something I know I have to get on. So
yeah,
it's coming. It's coming. whether I'm ready or not. It's I guess that's how I'm gonna get ready. Is I'm just gonna
Yeah.
Now that I'm feeling better, I feel like I can actually think about that stuff again. Like I could not think about work at all this week.
Right.
I just my brain was fried. So it's nice to have my brain feeling a little bit better, a little bit more like geared for work. But yeah,
Right.
Otherwise, I think that's it. And then Artist Week, the Artist Way week. Am I into week 6 next week? Some week. I think it's week 6. Yeah. So more of that stuff too. Otherwise, yeah. All right. So everyone, thank you very much for listening. You can send questions and comments to streamofartpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow us on Instagram. We are at streamofartpodcast. You can follow Robyn on Instagram. You can follow me on Instagram. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel. Videos forthcoming. All those links will be in the show notes. You can join our Discord server. And yeah, I think that's it. So everyone have a great week, and we will see you in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.